It is a great grace to be in the presence of a relic. Doubly so when that relic belongs to an apostle, to a man chosen by Christ to be one of his closest collaborators, a man whom Christ formed and taught, who ministered alongside Christ, who lived with him, who ate with him. And Jude is further special in that he is the first cousin of Jesus Christ. The church fathers inform us Jude is the son of Mary of Clopas, and if her name is familiar to you, it is so because she was one of the three Marys who stood at the foot of the Lord's cross at his crucifixion. There was, of course, the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mary Magdalene, and Mary of Clopas. The church fathers inform us that Mary of Clopas and the Blessed Virgin Mary are sisters, making her son, St. Jude, and her other son, also an apostle, St. James the Less, first cousins of Jesus Christ. So we have here not just the relics of an apostle. We have here family of Jesus. Many times this arm embraced the body of the Savior of the world. This is how close we are to Jesus in this moment. Jude, among the 12 apostles, in the pages of the gospel, is easily the one who has the smallest profile. Stated in different words, among the 12 apostles, Jude is easily the biggest nobody. In the entire gospel, he utters only one single sentence. And it's a question he poses to Jesus on the night of the Last Supper. And it's a question that no one can ever remember. By the looks on your faces, I can tell you can't remember it either. Here's his question. How come? That's it. Exit stage right. The Lord has just stated he is not going to reveal himself to the world in the same way that he has to his apostles. And that perplexes Jude, because he interprets that to mean that the world will miss out and not receive as much as what the apostles have received. Little does he know what Jesus has planned. On the following day, he will suffer and die for the world's sin, for all of the world's sin throughout time. And 3 days later, rise from the dead, and in so doing, open the gates of heaven. Jude does write an epistle in the New Testament, the letter of St. Jude, but at 25 verses in length, 1 page, it is the shortest of the New Testament epistles. His name is the cause of endless confusion for varying reasons. His name is Judas, but to distinguish him from the betrayer with the same name, it was decided decades ago that in English his name would be abbreviated to Jude. Written Chinese is the only other language that modifies his name. The problem is, though, that some editions of the Bible preserve his name as Judas, others abbreviate it to Jude. Some folks reading those two variants think that two different men are being spoken of when it is one. The name Judas was one of the most common male names during New Testament times, equivalent to Bob or Steve within American culture. So to distinguish him from all the other Judases of his day, some New Testament authors don't refer to him as Judas at all, but call him by his nickname, Thaddeus or Thaddeus, depending upon how you choose to pronounce it in English. But there's a problem with even the nickname, because the nickname Thaddeus was a generic male nickname that any male could possess. The English equivalent is Bubba. We have relics of St. Bubba here for veneration. As the New Testament progressed, he began to be called Jude of James. Jude of James. Normally, almost always, when you see that formula in the New Testament, this guy of that guy, what is being stated is this guy is the son of that guy. You're naming a man in reference to his father. The one single exception applies to none other than St. Jude. James is not his father, but his brother, St. James the Less, who in contrast to Jude, who had a very low profile, St. James the Less had an immense profile because he was the Bishop of Jerusalem. Now there's a high office for you. First bishop of the first diocese of the world. So here's the irony. St. Jude is the lesser known brother of St. James the Less. So there's an irony here. How do you go from being the nobody among the apostles, the nobody in the New Testament, to being what Jude is today? St. Jude the Apostle is easily one of the most popular saints in the church. There are more shrines dedicated to St. Jude worldwide than to any other saint, with the exception of his holy aunt, the Blessed Virgin Mary. How do you go from being the nobody to being the superstar? And that is the point of this homily. Many of us love St. Jude. Some of us have loved him our whole lives. Almost none of us know anything about him. And that's what I hope to remedy through this homily. We know, following Pentecost, of course, is when the apostles received their marching orders and were sent out to evangelize the world. And this is why, when you see an image of St. Jude, you see him depicted with a flame above his head. That is a reference to the day of Pentecost, when this occurred. He received the instructions, the edict from God, to go and minister at the city of Edessa within the nation of Armenia. And how this came about leading up to Pentecost is fascinating. The king of Armenia, Abgar V, was dying of a terrible illness, and he had heard about this Jesus of Nazareth who went around from town to town and village to village healing people. And evidently, he was the real thing, because news of his healing abilities had reached Abgar all the way in Armenia. Armenia is nowhere near Israel. It is across the Asian peninsula. It's on the opposite side of Asia Minor. So Abgar sent 2 spies to go observe the Lord and to follow him to see whether he was the real thing. And so 2 spies were sent, and they followed the Lord throughout his ministry until such a time as they were convinced enough to go and report back their findings to the king. And they came back and said, this guy is the real thing. He really does heal people. And the people he heals stay healed. One of the 2 was a spy. And he sketched an image of the Lord's face and presented it to the king and said, look, this is what the guy looks like. So Abgar wrote a letter to the Lord and sent an envoy to hand deliver it to him. And his letter stated this: I hear you are a healer. Please, if you are able, come to me and set me free from this terrible illness that is taking my life. And our Lord actually wrote him a response. And this is a big deal, because it is the only time Jesus Christ left behind a piece of writing. And in his reply to Abgar, the Lord states, I must fulfill the work of the one who sent me. But after I have returned to him, I will send someone to do what you ask of me in my name. Bubba is the one whom he sent. And as a pledge that the Lord would fulfill what he promises Abgar in his letter, the Lord took a cloth, pressed his face into the cloth, and the image of his holy face miraculously remained behind on it. Now, this is not the veil of Veronica, and this is not the Shroud of Turin. Those are different miraculous images produced later, during the time of the Lord's Passion. The image of Edessa, as this image has come to be known, was the first of the miraculous images the Lord produced of his holy face, and it was held in immense reverence in the ancient world. And in producing the image of Edessa, the Lord reveals to us something of God's playfulness. Abgar sent a spy to go sketch an image of the Lord's face. In producing the image of Edessa, the Lord is saying to Abgar, I can do better than your guy. Among everything else one can say about God, he is also playful. The image of Edessa, along with the letters exchanged between the Lord and Abgar, were kept at the archives at the city of Edessa for centuries, and they were witnessed to by a great many of the church fathers, including the famous Saint Eusebius of Caesarea, the greatest of the ancient Christian historians. Most of our knowledge of the ancient church, the primitive Christian church, we obtain from Eusebius. And no one in the ancient world doubted the authenticity of the letters or of the image. Unfortunately, none of the three exist any longer. All three were destroyed at France by the revolutionaries during the French Revolution. We possess the text of the letters because it was copied over many times. We no longer possess the actual letters nor the image of Edessa. Regardless, the records state that when Jude entered into Armenia and walked into the city of Edessa and was led into the chamber where Abgar the king was lying on his back dying, light was emanating from Jude's flesh. And he walked up to the king and placed his right arm on him, this arm, and Abgar was healed instantly and immediately converted to the Christian faith, as you would do when a man whose flesh is glowing with light places his arm upon you and removes from you your lethal illness. I think you would convert rather quickly. The records state Jude remained behind in Armenia for a period of time and healed a great many of the sick. And Armenia has the glory and honor of being the first nation in history to convert to Christianity in total. For this reason, when you visit Jerusalem today, Jerusalem is in Israel. It's nowhere near Armenia. But the city of Jerusalem is divided into 4 quarters. There is the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, the generic Christian quarter, and the Armenian Christian quarter, all because of the ministry of this man. Following his time in Armenia, the records pertaining to Jude get a little bit fuzzier. We know that he ministered in ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. We know he ministered in ancient Persia, modern-day Iran. And we know he ministered within the regions of Tyre and Sidon, modern-day Lebanon. The records, however, are divided as to whether he met his demise, whether he suffered martyrdom in ancient Persia, modern-day Iran, or at the city of Beirut within modern-day Lebanon. Regardless, all records are unanimous in that he was martyred with his missionary partner, St. Simon the Apostle. Jude was clubbed to death viciously and then beheaded with an axe. Simon was cut in half with a saw. It is for this reason why whenever you see an image depicted of Jude, you always see him, whether in a statue or in a painting, you always see him depicted holding a club. That is a reference to the instrument of his martyrdom. always on his chest you see an image of the Lord's face. That is a reference to the image of Edessa, for which he is forever linked. The bodies of the two apostles were buried in the ground near the site of their martyrdoms, and then two events occurred which combined form the reasons why we possess these relics today and how we know with certainty that they belong to St. Jude the Apostle. The first event is that Christians did what Christians do. They erected a church over top of their graves. And the existence of the church answers for us, or provides for us, three key pieces of information. It marks where the bodies are buried. It's hard to lose track of a couple of bodies when there's a large stone church built over top of them. It provides a place for the Sunday Eucharist. From the church's beginning, Mass was always celebrated over the tombs of the saints. Right? The altar was always positioned over a tomb. That is why at the start and at the end of every Mass, the cleric or clerics who celebrate it venerate the altar with a kiss. What we are doing is greeting the saints whose relics have been embedded inside the altar. Every altar is a tomb. The third thing established by the church is the preservation of the bones by keeping them dry and free from exposure to the elements. Bone can keep indefinitely as long as it is kept dry. The other event that occurred is an irony. God took advantage for his own purposes and will of pagan Roman superstition. The ancient Romans were an immensely superstitious people. They were, among other things, deathly afraid of ghosts. For this reason, the Romans had numerous prohibitions written into their laws restricting, forbidding certain things you might desire to do to somebody's grave. You were never permitted to desecrate it or otherwise mess with it, even a grave belonging to an enemy of Rome. Why? Because the Romans believed that if you messed with somebody's grave, you might stir up a ghost. And then, once you've got a ghost on your back, who are you going to call? So the existence of the church answers the question, where were the apostles buried? And how was it possible that their remains were preserved through the centuries? The existence of pagan Roman superstition answers the question, but how can we be certain that the bones removed later were the bones of the two apostles? So the remains of the apostles remained in the ground in their original graves until the year 335, when the Emperor Constantine the Great exhumed them and transported them to Rome, and he placed them inside the new grand basilica he was building in honor of St. Peter the Apostle on the Vatican Hill. And he placed them in the left transept of that basilica. So the Basilica of St. Peter in the Vatican is built in the shape of a giant cross. In the left wing of that cross, at its very end, is a high altar known as the altar of St. Joseph. Constantine placed the skeletons of the two apostles directly beneath that altar, where they remain to this day. 500 years ago, Jude's right arm was removed and placed within this carved wooden reliquary, and all of the above events are the reasons why we possess these relics for veneration today, and how we know with certainty that they belong to St. Jude the Apostle. Following Jude's death, an irony occurred. He entered into the fullness of the dignity and identity of his vocation in this life. In a way that is absolutely uncanny, God was saving up a plan for Jude, a plan that would inaugurate only upon his death, to such an extent that a case could be made that St. Jude the Apostle is the greatest evangelist in Christian history, because the greatest events of Christian history have his fingerprints all over them. I will share with you just two of them. In the year 250, Valerian became emperor of Rome. Valerian was a butcher who hated Christians. more so than even the emperors Nero and Diocletian, under whom tens of thousands of Christians lost their lives. Valerian's first act of office was to issue a series of 8 decrees he thought would stamp out and eradicate the Christian faith once and for all. Now, to give you a flavor, one of those decrees, for example, stated this: if you rat out on a Christian, he is executed. His property and possessions are confiscated, but you are entitled to a cut of each of them. So there was a financial incentive for you to rat out on a Christian. Constantine issued these series of 8 decrees and then promptly went out and made war against the Sufi, or king, of Persia. Persia's king always carried the title of Sufi. And among all of the places on this planet where these two gigantic armies met in war, they met in war, ironically, at the city of Edessa within the kingdom of Armenia, the city and nation made Christian and made holy by this man. The unimaginable happened. To that point in time, ancient Rome had existed for over 1,200 years. Militarily, it had never experienced defeat. The Roman military machine was the most feared army in the world because it was, evidently, unconquerable. On that day, at the Battle of Edessa, not only did the Roman army lose, the entire Roman army was captured, including the Emperor Valerian. Valerian was taken to Persia to be the personal slave of the Sufi. The records from the time state that among the other humiliations he had to endure, he had to get down on his hands and knees and serve as a stool for the Sufi to step on his back while mounting his horse. He died as the Sufi slave 7 years later, never setting eyes on his homeland again. Upon the capture of his father, Valerian's son immediately became emperor, and he recognized, it is because of what my father did against the Christians that Rome is suffering this catastrophic embarrassment. In other words, it was his belief the Christian God was exacting revenge for what his father had decreed against the Christians. So his first act of office was to rescind those anti-Christian decrees promulgated by his father. And that began what historians today call the little peace of the church, a 40-year period, the longest in the ancient world, where Christians could live peacefully and persecution-free. Upon the close of those 40 years, the persecutions started up again in earnest. But then, some 23 years later, a young Roman general named Constantine, whose name you've already heard this evening, was getting ready to face a rival general at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in the city of Rome. Milvian Bridge is an ancient stone bridge that still exists to this day. I have walked over it many times. That battle that day fought on that bridge is easily the most decisive battle in human history. Because if Constantine had not won that battle, friends, you and I today would not be Christians. Constantine was severely outnumbered and was widely expected to lose. But as he was marching towards that bridge, he saw written in the sky these words: "In this sign you will conquer." And there was an image of a Cairo, a P with an X through the stem, an ancient Christian symbol representing the first 2 letters of the Greek word for Christ. Constantine ordered each of his men to paint a Cairo on his shield. And they won that day against every odd. And Constantine recognized, it is not because of my skills as a commander, nor the power of my men by which we won today. We won because the Christian God fought on our behalf. And so pagan Constantine immediately converted to the Christian faith, and he made it a capital crime punishable by execution if you were to persecute a Christian. And while he didn't force anyone to convert to the Christian faith, if you wanted a position in his government, or if you wanted a promotion within the same, those were reserved only for Christians. And so, protected by the strength and now the faith of the Roman Empire, Christianity was free to spread itself across the entire civilized world. And that is the reason why you and I are Christians today. All because of the battle at Milvian Bridge, which occurred on October 28th, feast day of St. Jude the Apostle. As the churches in Rome were singing their closing hymns at the solemn Mass of St. Jude, Constantine was being declared the victor and being proclaimed new Roman emperor, and thus altered the history of the world. Following the Christianization of Europe, an irony occurred. All devotion to St. Jude the Apostle worldwide ceased for 1,200 years. From 500 until 1700, no one prayed to St. Jude the Apostle. A cancerous thinking developed that was diabolical in origin, and it was a revenge by the enemy against Jude for what he did at the Battle of Edessa, when he usurped the 1,200-year record of non-defeat of pagan Rome's army, such that the devil brought it about that for 1,200 years, beginning in 500, no one prayed to St. Jude the Apostle. Here's how the devil did it. Now, I'm not making a word of this up, but get ready to giggle. The devil planted a thought, a scruple in people's minds. If you pray to Saint Judas, your prayers may inadvertently go to Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, and so they won't be heard. So all devotion to St. Jude the Apostle ceased until 1700, when something happened which was absolutely a divine action. It had to be, because it occurred simultaneously, worldwide, all at once. And what happened was a situation where thousands upon thousands of people, the world over, each disconnected from one another, living in their own communities, independently of one another. But what was common to them all is that every one of them needed a miracle to avert some tragedy or other in their lives. Not just a divine grace, not just a nice thing, but a miracle. And so they poured out their prayers to God, begging him to grant that miracle. None was forthcoming. They begged the saints, going up and down the church's long list of the saints, begging each one of them to obtain for them the miracle they needed. No miracle was forthcoming. And so now all of these people are desperate and hopeless. And now it was God's turn to plant a thought. And he planted within one of them this: you've tried everyone else. What have you got to lose? Send your prayers his way. And you know what happened? Baba hit every one of those petitions out of the ballpark. And it was from that time, from 1700, that St. Jude the Apostle became known as the patron saint of hopeless cases and desperate situations, because only hopeless cases and desperate situations were given him. And he has rightly earned the nickname of the Apostle of the Impossible, and enjoys a popularity today that is surpassed only by the popularity of the Mother of God. Think of the last time that you walked down the candle aisle at a grocery or dollar store. When you reached the devotional candles, what did you see? You saw candles of this guy front and center. But even if you saw candles of no other saint, you saw candles of this guy. Immensely popular. But I will tell you this, friends, if you had walked to St. Jude, walked up to him 2,000 years ago on Good Friday in the evening, after our Lord had already hung on the cross, and after his body had already been taken down, and that body was now inside a tomb getting cold. If you had walked up to him at that point and said to him something like this, "Oh my God in heaven, one of the original 12 apostles, and a blood relative of Jesus Christ to boot. It is an absolute honor to meet you. The church one day is going to hail you as one of its greatest heroes. We are going to celebrate an absolutely packed house mass for you at Sacred Heart Church in the Diocese of Portland, just over the California border, in front of the presence of your holy arm." If you had said to him something like this, at best, he would have rolled his eyes at you. At worst, he would have vomited and ran away. Because in that moment, friends, all Jude felt like is a total and complete loser. Earlier that day, when his Lord and relative needed him most as he hung on the cross, Jude was nowhere to be found. His mother had the guts to stand at the foot of the cross, but he didn't. And so when the Lord rose from the dead and made his first resurrection appearance to his apostles, and by this time there was only 11 of them. One had already taken his life. And this is in John 20. The first thing the Lord had to do was forgive his apostles for their unfaithfulness. Yes, John stood at the foot of the cross at the crucifixion, but even he ran away at the time of the Lord's arrest. So the first words out of the mouth of Jesus Christ, resurrected in the flesh, to his apostles, were words of forgiveness and absolution. "Peace be with you," he said to them. But then Jude, in that moment, had to do something that was absolutely heroic. He had to accept that forgiveness. And that, friends, is no small thing. Because when we've messed up big time, when we've screwed things up royally, the easiest thing to do is hate ourselves and despise ourselves and hold ourselves in contempt. And we can even tell ourselves that such a mistreatment is good and just because I messed up. And so I don't deserve happiness. I deserve pain and misery. And we can even tell ourselves that even God is pleased with such a mistreatment. How can anything that contradicts Scripture ever please God, who commands us, who orders us over and over in his word to forgive our enemies? Well, that holds true, friends, even if your enemy is your own very self. The hardest thing, but most profitable, that many of us will ever do is to stand in front of the mirror and look at that person who is staring back at us and say to that person, "I forgive you. I release you from what I hold against you. And I ask God to give you a blessing instead." That is exactly what this man did to himself. And I will tell you this, in that moment, when Jesus Christ, resurrected in the flesh, was standing in front of him, saying to him, "I want you on my team again," ripping through this guy's head was the loudest voice he had ever heard in his life, saying to him, "Just walk away from the Lord." No, run away from him. Run away from Jesus so that he can then replace you with somebody better than you. Because you're too incompetent, too useless, too much of a loser to be of any use to Jesus Christ. Run away from him now, and then he can replace you with somebody better than you. Somebody who will actually do something for him, because you are useless. You're the idiot who never even talks. You don't even know what to say. So in that moment, friends, this man had to make a decision. Does he listen to the voice of a man who is also God, who has just conquered sin and death? Or does he listen to the voice of dysfunction, the same voice of dysfunction that resides within you and I? And thank God for his sake, and for yours and for mine, that he made the choice that he did. Because it would have been the easiest thing in the world for him to walk away from the Lord and felt justified in doing so. And this is the crazy and perverted nature of sin. We can know what God's will is, say to him no in the face, and walk away thinking we are the ones who are correct. This is the crazy and the perverted nature of sin. And it is useful to compare his response to the Lord with that of the other Judas, Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot repented of his sin. We know this. He took the 30 crummy pieces of silver he was paid to betray the Lord back to the temple authorities. And when they refused to accept it because it was blood money, he threw it away. He wanted nothing to do with it. He repented of his sin. We also know that Jesus Christ himself forgave him for his sin. At the moment that Judas planted the kiss on the Lord's cheek at the Garden of Gethsemane, that kiss, that was the sign of the betrayal. That was the prearranged sign that Judas had worked out with the arresting authorities. He had said to them, the guy I kiss, that's the one you want to arrest him. At the moment that he planted that God-forsaken kiss on the cheek of the world's Savior, the Lord turned to him and said, "Friend, do you betray me with a kiss?" The Lord called him friend. The Lord was not being sarcastic when he did so. You know what sarcasm means? It's a word made up of two Greek words that mean to tear flesh. Jesus Christ tears no one's flesh. He is the one who allows his flesh to be torn. When Jesus Christ calls Judas Iscariot friend at Gethsemane, he means exactly that. At the very moment the sin is committed, in the very instance of the betrayal, the Lord forgives it. So if Judas repented of his sin and the Lord forgave him for it, why do we not honor Judas Iscariot as a saint, but we do honor St. Jude and the other 10 apostles when all 12 of them were sinners? Because Judas Iscariot, friends, refused to forgive himself. He refused to accept Christ's love and apply it to himself. He could have been the greatest of the 12 apostles, because if our Lord had not died, he couldn't have risen from the dead. And if he had not risen from the dead, then the gates of heaven would still be closed to all. And upon our deaths, yours and mine, you and I would receive the same fate every other soul did from Adam and Eve until that very instant when Christ rose from the dead. Upon our deaths, you and I would descend to hell, because that's where every soul went until Christ rose from the dead. Both the wicked and the holy ended up in the same place. The wicked were there forever, but the holy, the righteous, were awaiting the Messiah that would break them free. St. Joseph, foster father of Jesus, he was in hell. Saints Joachim and Anne, parents of the Blessed Virgin Mary, grandparents of Jesus Christ, and St. Jude, they were in hell. John the Baptist, Moses, and the prophets were in hell, awaiting the Messiah that would break them free. Judas's betrayal was the trigger that unleashed that event and made it happen. Judas Iscariot could have been the greatest of the 12, but he blew it. This Judas, however, accepted Christ's love, and that for him, friends, made all the difference in the world. And so his life has to be for you and I a sign, a reminder that God has great plans for you and I. God's plan for you is to make you into a great saint. And if you're a nobody, a loser, God does his best work with folks like you. Just ask this guy. And so when you come forward to venerate these relics at the end of this Mass, you need to know one thing. It is not just Jude's bones that are here. All of St. Jude the Apostle is here present. Because the soul of a saint, who is even now in heaven, beholding God face to face, living in his glory, living in perfect communion with God, that same soul is just as present in his or her relics. All of Jude the Apostle is here present. And as a saint, as an apostle, as an agent or emissary, because that's what apostle means, he has come a long way for the chance to meet you personally. And so when you are in front of him, you need to say to him two things. Jude, I accept you as my friend. I accept you as my friend. When you are in front of him, say the words. You don't have to say them out loud, but say them. I accept you as my friend. Next, say to him, I accept the gift you have for me today. I accept your gift. He has a gift for everyone. I have no idea what yours will be. It is different and unique for each person. But friends, you just need to trust me on this one. He has a gift for you, but cannot give it to you unless you accept it. I accept your friendship and your gift. Give him all of your prayer intentions, everything that is on your heart. But I'll tell you right now what's going to happen. Either on your drive home from this event, or perhaps later tonight, maybe as you're getting into bed, perhaps sometime tomorrow, you're going to smack your head and you're going to say something like this. Oh, good God in heaven, I forgot to pray for my sick Aunt Selma. How could I forget my Aunt Selma? I even prayed for Frank at work, and I can't stand Frank. It doesn't matter. When you leave here today, your friend will leave with you and will never leave you. And so when that petition or any other petition comes to mind down the road, you turn to your friend and you say, Jude, I need you to do something for my Aunt Selma, or for this person, and for that family, and for this situation. And your friend who dwells in God's very heart will get to work on your behalf. You are welcome to touch the glass of the display case. You are encouraged to do so. Why? Every time relics are mentioned in the Bible, two things always occur. There is always a healing. There is never not a healing. Touch is the way by which that healing comes about. Not because relics are magical, they are not magical, but because the entire saint is present in his or her relics. All of Jude is here present. You are welcome to touch the display case with any objects of devotion you have, a rosary, a holy card, your wedding band. We hear about touched relics in Acts chapter 19. Paul the apostle, they would touch him with rags, then put the rags on the sick. Their diseases would leave them. And get this one. If they had any evil spirits, they would depart from him. Make a relic here today. Take it home with you. And down the road, when you're going through a rough time, or you know someone else who is, you take that relic and you put it on that person and you say, Jude, I need you to do something for this person. And your friend, who is so beloved by God, God finds his requests irresistible. Your friend will get to work on your behalf. If you wish, there is something you can do for St. Jude. This relic comes from the shrine of St. Jude in the city of Rome. That shrine is very close to St. Peter's Basilica. It has a great big dome on top of it, just like the dome on top of St. Peter's. That dome has been damaged by recent weather events, by storm and lightning damage. It needs an extensive renovation. Later on in this Mass, there will be a collection taken up, the proceeds of which will be for the restoration of St. Jude's dome. If you wish to do something for St. Jude, you might consider making a contribution as your means allow. But I will tell you this. This tour with his relics began almost a year ago, last September, and it began at a church in downtown Chicago. I was 1 hour away from that first stop. I was an hour's drive away when my cell phone went off. On the other end of the phone was a gentleman named Doug Edwards. Doug is a man whom I met in Michigan several years ago. He introduced himself to me at one of these relic events I was conducting. And he said to me, "Father, I own a small printing shop. If you ever have printing needs, let me know." And so I called him last summer and said to him, "Doug, the Vatican has placed me in charge of this pilgrimage of the relics of St. Jude the Apostle. I need to produce great big pull-up, self-standing banners. Do you do that type of printing?" He said, "Sure, Father." I said, "Great, I'll send you the digital files, price them out, send me an invoice, I'll fire off a check to you." And he said to me, "Well, Father, I'm not going to charge you." And I said, "Doug, I don't think you know how many and how large of banners I need. Those are the banners over in the hall next door." I said, "Doug, the last time I produced this number of this size of banner, the cost was more than $20,000. He said, "Father, I'm not charging you. These are going to be my gift to St. Jude. And giving him this gift is going to make me feel like I'm evangelizing alongside an apostle." What do you say to that? When he had them finished, I called him up. I said, "Doug, I'm coming by to get them. I'm bringing the apostle with me. So call over your friends and family, whoever you like, to your shop. They can have some up-close and personal time with St. Jude." Now, Doug's wife, Noreen, I had never met. In 2001, she had a debilitating brain condition for which surgery was necessary. But that surgery left her in a terrible way. It left her in a vegetative state. 10 days afterwards, she was still in a coma. So the surgeons went in and did a second surgery to try to bring her out of that coma, which it thankfully worked, but it left her without the ability to walk or talk. After a grueling and long regimen of therapy, physiotherapy, she was able to regain her ability to speak. But she was never able to regain her mobility. So she was an invalid and required being looked after. When I arrived at Doug's shop, I said to him, "Doug, which one of these people here is your wife, Noreen? I want to pray with her with St. Jude." And he said, "Father, unfortunately, Noreen is not having a good day today. She wasn't able to be here." I said, "No problem. We'll go to your house. We'll bring the apostle with us." And he said, "Father, thank you very much for your offer, but Noreen is having a very bad day today and is just not up for a visit." So I went up to Jude and I said to him, "Jude, Doug is your friend. He has done a lot for you. I need you to do something for his wife, Noreen." The next day, when Doug went home for lunch, his lunch routine was always the same. He would go home from his shop, prepare lunch, feed his wife, feed himself, return to work. When he walked through the door of his house that day, the unimaginable had taken place. Lunch was already laid out on the table because Noreen had prepared it. Because all her debilitations, infirmities, and afflictions are gone. And that phone call, when I was 1 hour away from the first stop on this tour, in other words, this tour had not yet even started, Doug Edwards was screaming at me over and over again, "My wife is darting about the house like a young girl." The apostle of the impossible knocked another one out of the ballpark. Friends, if you take nothing else with you from this experience here today, if you take nothing else home with you, make sure you take home this guy as your friend. You will never, ever regret it. On the night he was betrayed, he himself took bread, and giving him thanks, he said the blessing, broke the bread, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it. For this is my body, which will be given up for you."